Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of October. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Yesterday, in the end of my previous video, I told you that the Russians didn't attack the areas in Chernigov region and Sumsky region, these two areas. And my projection, my understanding was that maybe the Russians were planning or are planning to open another front line or to attack Ukraine from this area because they are not attacking their infrastructure and their energy facilities. But this morning we got updates that during the day the Russians were attacking Sumy and Sumy energy facilities. Furthermore, the Russians continue shelling Kiev and Kiev energy facilities that connects and supplies the Chernigov area. But anyway, if we compare today with today's attacks, Russian attacks against the Ukrainian energy facilities with their attacks of yesterday or the day before yesterday, we see that the Russians reduced their pressure. And some of you may think that the Russians decided to stop, or maybe they decided to change their focus, or they're not planning to continue doing these attacks and so on. I have my own opinion about this situation, and for these purposes, let's take a look at the energy map of Ukraine. First of all, I would like to say that this map is the Russian sources map, of course, so that's why you can see this Ukraine, the new borders of Ukraine. So if you feel uncomfortable with this, please just sorry me for that, because there is no other source where I can provide you such detailed information. So this is the energy map of Ukraine, and there are, as you can see, a lot of icons, a lot of lines. And first of all, there are two types of lines, the white line and the green line. The green line is the lines of 330 kilowatts line. The white one is 750 kilowatts lines. Also, there are two types of icon with the arrow. This one, the red one and the green one. The green one is 330 kilowatt substations, and the red one is 750 kilowatt substations. So this is the energy map of Ukraine, and the Russians are saying that most of these energy facilities still functioning. The Ukrainians are still using them. Of course, the Russians did a lot of problems for the Ukrainians with this system. You know that at some towns, the Ukrainians were forced to shut down electricity for some period of time. And today we got, I believe that many of you heard that the Russians managed to shut down around 25% of energy system of Ukraine. So that's a lot, but the Russians suddenly stopped. And the question is, are they planning to continue? I think that they're planning. But now, the Ukrainians, what are the Ukrainians doing right now? First of all, the Ukrainians need to stabilize the entire system. And with these purposes, because of the fact that a lot of substations and a lot of lines were destroyed, now the Ukrainians need to create another stable system. And this is the reason why the Russians stopped. If we're talking about the Russians, they are not able to destroy entire Ukrainian energy system for three reasons. And the first reason is Rovno power plant. The second reason is Khmelnytskaya power plant. And the third reason is South Ukrainian power plant. All these power plants is nuclear power plants. And the Russians are not able to destroy the entire Ukrainian energy facilities, energy system, because if they do this, we're gonna see another Chernobyl, or maybe another 3 Chernobyls on the territory of Ukraine. So that's why the Russians need to save some energy facilities in Ukraine, just with one purpose. These energy facilities should work for these 3 power plants. So that's why the Russians stopped during the previous days, stopped today. And now they are following and trying to understand what kind of system, what kind of pipelines the Ukrainians are planning to prepare right now, just to stabilize the system. And believe me, as soon as the Ukrainians are able to stabilize the system, as soon as they see that there is nothing wrong with all these nuclear power plants, the Russians will continue. And now let's try to analyze the entire energy system of Ukraine, try to understand, trying to project the Russians' next steps in this area. Of course, if we take a look at this map, we're going to see that there are two, we can say, weakest point in Ukrainian energy system. The first one is Vinnytsia, this one. This area, like this area, Vinnytsia, connects two parts of Ukraine, the west one and the south of Ukraine. As you can see, there are at least one 330 kilowatts line, and there is one 750 kilowatts line. And if the Russians are able to shut down and destroy these lines and substations in this area, then they will be able to cut the south of Ukraine from the west of Ukraine, and then the south of Ukrainian region will be forced to use the electricity using the east lines, the lines, electricity line, energy lines that located on the east side of Ukraine in this area, because this one can be shut down in this area and with no connections between the west and the south. And another second weak point is Kiev. That's why the Russians were attacking Kiev so much, because you can see there are a lot of lines that moves from the west part of Ukraine to the east part of Ukraine. One of them are moved to the south to Dnieper. So that's why the Russians were attacking this area as well, trying to cut all these connections. And of course, the Russians, the thing that they need to do is to cut. First thing they need to do is to cut West Ukraine from the south of Ukraine. And now the Russians deal some damage. They have unstabilized the Ukrainian system, and now they're watching. They're following the Ukrainians' actions. What are they doing? Of course, and I'll repeat one more time, to be very successful, the Russians need to cut this Vinnytsia logistic center, and they need to do something with Kiev. And if the Russians are able to destroy or to do something with Kiev lines and Vinnytsia lines, then we can say that entire east part of Ukraine will be shut down from the entire Ukraine, from the west Ukraine, where there are a lot of power plants. But I believe that it's impossible or highly unlikely to do something with Kiev, because there are still a lot of it's a capital of Ukraine. I believe that soon there are going to be a lot of anti-aircraft, anti-air forces, and they will be able to shut down the Russian rockets. So that's why the Russians need to do something else. They need to find another solution. Because if they want to be successful on their front lines, they need to cut the entire south from electricity. And then they will be able to attack the Ukrainians, to attack their forces. They won't be very mobile, they won't be flexible, they won't receive any support and supply. And for these purposes, if we take a look at this map one more time, we see that if the Russians attack Sumy, the region that we talked yesterday, Sumy, this area, then they will be able to shut down the Kharkiv area and shut down the east part of Ukraine. And as you can see, there is just one line that connects Kiev and Sumy, then moves to Kharkiv, and then from Sumy it moves to Dnieper and so on. So that's why the Russians, and as you can see, this area is very close to the Russian Federation, so I believe that they will concentrate their attack in Sumy-Chernihiv area, in this area, just to cut Kharkiv from the main of Ukraine. And Vinnytsia, so at least now we have counted two focal points. It's Vinnytsia region, Sumy region, and of course the third important area is Kremenchuk, this one. This the area of 330 kilowatts line that moves from Kiev to the rest of Ukraine, to the east of Ukraine. So if the Russians are able to destroy Kremenchuk and this area, then the entire energy system of the south of Ukraine will be shut down. Not shut down, but at least it will be very easy to destroy this area, to reduce this area, because this area doesn't support the power plants on the west. I believe that the Russians are not able to do anything with the west, because there are two nuclear power plants, and anyway they need to save the power plants in this area that will work for these two power plants. So I believe that we can forget about the shutting down of the west of Ukraine, at least till the line of Vinnytsia Kiev. So in this area, it's highly unlikely that the Russians will shut down. But if we're talking about the rest of Ukraine, it is possible to do this. But there is one problem in this area, at least in the south. If we're talking about the east, there are no problems at all. The Russians are able to shut down the east of Ukraine easily. very easily because there are no nuclear power plants, and they can attack all these lines and the east of Ukraine will be shut down. The only problem in the south is the South Ukrainian nuclear power plant, this one. And anyway, the Russians, they need to keep at least few power plants that will support this nuclear power plant for their work. How to do this? For now, I don't have solution for this. But anyway, I believe that if the Russians are not able to shut down the South Ukrainian nuclear power plant and shut down the lines that connects energy lines that connects this power plant with the rest of Ukraine, or at least with the south of Ukraine, anyway, the Russians are able to shut down everything from the light, starting from Kryvyi Rog towards Kharkiv. So everything that located on the right side of Dnieper River and till Kryvyi Rog, all this area can be shut down from electricity easily. But for now, I believe that the Russians are just trying to understand where they need to attack next to minimize the losses, to minimize their rocket, the usages of their rockets, and so on. Now let's talk about the front lines. If we talk about the front lines, we can say that the front lines are stable. The only updates that the Russians on Kupya's front line, they made few attempts of counter-offensive operation in this area, and as a result of those operations, the Russians returned Dibrovo, Tarskoye, Terny, all this area. Tarskoye is in the gray zone, but anyway, all this territory between this gray line and green line is under Russian control. So now we can say that if we take a look at the Western sources map, we're gonna see that the front line in this area moves on this line, but according to the Russian sources, and this information is confirmed by the Ukrainians, the front line moves along this river Zheribets. And today the Russians reported the Ukrainians were trying to cross this river Zheribets one more time, and as a result of that operation, they lost around 60 soldiers and 5 armored vehicles. So I believe that if you take a look at this map, the east part of river Zheribets is still under under Russian control. Just the west part of this river, bank of this river, is under Ukrainians. If we're talking about the Kupiansk, about this town, there are also a lot of differences with the Russian sources map, because according to this map, we see that the Russians controls just the border over LPR, but if we take a look at this map, we're gonna see that the Russians still control some part of Kupiansk, of Oskol River, and they still control Stavlazhanka, and there are very heavy clashes around this town. The Ukrainians are not able to take control of this town. They're sending more and more reinforcement, and as you can see, the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians were trying to storm Volshana, that they were trying to storm Kislovka, this town, Tabaevka, and Kuzyomovka, these towns. Furthermore, the Russians reported that if we're talking about Kislovka, the Ukrainians managed to enter the west part of Ukraine. The Russians were forced to leave the west part, but later, during the day, they managed to push the Ukrainians back, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back on their previous position. And as a result of all those battles during the previous 24 hours, the Ukraine lost around 100 soldiers and 10 armored vehicles on this area. The Russian sources are saying that there are around 40,000 soldiers from the Ukrainian side who involved in all these operations, and they're continue doing the regrouping, and maybe from day to day they're planning to start another counter-offensive operation in the direction of Svatovo. But for now, they are not able to do this, and mainly because of the fact that the Russians still holds their defense line over the Zheribets River, over this river. And for now, the Ukrainians don't have a stable bridgehead on this side of Zheribets River. So that's mean that if they don't have this stable bridgehead, that means that they need to attack between the rivers from the north and the same from the south. But as I told you, during the previous days, the Russians returned and attack control over the territory that located over all these towns. Terny, Yampolovka, Tarskoye, and the Ukrainians were forced to leave this bridgehead. So from now on, they don't have possibilities to attack Svatovo from the south, and the only area that Ukrainians can use is from the north. So that's why they're attacking this town Kislovka, this one. But according to the Russian sources, this town is still under Russian control. And during the previous days, during all these reports from the Ministry of Defense, there are very heavy clashes on this front line. The Ukrainians are trying to push, but all their attempts were defeated by the Russians. If we are talking about other front lines, there are no changes as well. If we're talking about Kryvyi Rog, if we're talking about Zaporozhye front line, there is no changes. That the only update that Ukrainians sent some commandos in this area, but they were spotted and destroyed. Around 7 soldiers were killed from the Ukrainian side. If we're talking about Donetsk, the Russians are storming Nivolskaya, this town. During the day, they managed to establish control over a few checkpoints in this area, over these trenches. As you can see, the Russians have already updated and showed the map. So they are very close to Nivolskaya, and the main reason why the Russians are very successful in this direction is that the Pervomaiska is completely under Russian control. This map is not updated. I believe that there are still possibilities from the Ukrainian side to send some commandos or scouts in this area, but anyway, the supply road that connects Nivolskaya, this town, Nivolskaya and Pervomaiska has been cut off by the Russians, and now the garrison that located in this town is without any supply and support, and their artillery is useless. And so that's why the Russians have possibility to storm, and they're moving in this direction, and they're pretty successful, we can say. Now let's move to Kryvyi Rog front line, to this area. Today there were a lot of updates in this area. For the most important one, that the Ukrainians tried to send another Marines crossing the river on the boats, and the Russians reported that as a result of that attempt, the Ukraine lost around 30 soldiers and they lost all their boats. But a lot of Russian experts are saying that they're repeating our idea that we discussed many videos ago, that now the Ukrainians are preparing the marine storm operation of this bank of the river, and the Ukrainians will try to cross this Dnieper river from many sides, and they will attack, as we discussed, all along these areas, and first of all they will try to storm this bank of the river from many sides using as much force as they have. As we know, the United States of America sent them a lot of boats, that they can, fast boats, that I believe that up to 10 soldiers can take place in these boats. So I believe that they are able to send up to a few thousands of Ukrainian soldiers on this bank of the river, trying to storm the Russians and trying to establish bridgehead along the bank of the river. I'm not saying about heavy armor vehicle if the Ukrainians are able to cross this river with this equipment, because without armored vehicles all these operations are useless and just useless waste of time. Maybe some kind of pin down operation or something like this. If we're talking about Kherson district, there are also some updates. There are a lot of icons, as you can see. There are very heavy clashes. There is shutdown of helicopter. There is shutdown of drones. The Russians reported that during the day they destroyed up to 4 pontoon bridges on Ingulets River near Andreevka bridgehead, and the total losses of Ukrainians in this area were around 160 soldiers, something around 31 armored vehicles in this area. The Ukrainians are doing some kind of recon combo, trying to understand where is the weakest point of the Russians, but they're not starting their offensive operation, counter-offensive operation, and we understand why they're not starting it. Anyway, today we also got report that the Ukrainians managed to collect, I'll repeat one more time, 40,000 soldiers in the north of LPR Republic, 40,000 soldiers around Zaporozhye bridgehead, but as you can see there are no changes, no movements in this area. And a few videos ago we discussed that the Ukrainians used around 40,000 soldiers in the offensive operation near Kherson district, but now we see that there is an active phase of this offensive operation. I believe that soon this phase is going to stop, because the Ukrainians are losing blood in this area and they will have to make another decision where to attack. But I believe that they won't do this before they stabilize the energy system of Ukraine, because without this I believe it's highly unlikely that they can achieve success, or they're able to achieve success but they won't be able to support this success, because even if it take control over some kind of territory on the top of the Zaporozhye area, anyway you need to support, you need to supply, you need to move tanks, you need to repair equipment, you need to bring more ammo, shells, and if your energy system is shut down, that means that it will be very difficult to move and support this offensive operation. So that's why I believe that everybody waits. But if we're talking about the Russians, we understand that the time works in their favor, because every single day there is more and more mobile forces on the territory and they're preparing for something. But also you need to understand that I'm not saying that the Ukrainians, no, I'm saying, but I understand that these 40,000 soldiers all over the front line, in different front lines, doesn't mean that Ukrainians are planning to, not just means that Ukrainians are planning to start counteroffensive operation. Maybe the Ukrainians are preparing for defending operations. Who knows? They understand that the Russians are planning to move up to 300,000 soldiers in this area. And of course, they need to have at least, maybe if they are able to have the same number, it's the best solution. But I'm not sure they are able to have the same number of forces. So that's why they're doing some maneuvers all over Ukraine, trying to asking the NATO to bring some forces on the border with Belarus. It will allow them to move another forces to the front line. But anyway, maybe the Ukrainians are planning to defend. Maybe they're planning to defend. So this is the reason that we talked yesterday that it's not a very good idea to attack the Russians in LPR region or Zaporozhye or Kherson, because in this situation we're going to see the same picture as we can see right now near Bakhmut, that the Russians are able to take just a few square meters per one day, and it will be the same picture in this area. If the Ukrainians are able to collect 40,000 soldiers, let's say, and the Russians move another 40 or 60,000 this area, then the Russians will start counter-offensive operation, and it will be the same story, like trying to reduce the Ukrainians and trying to take another square meter for another day. So this is not solution for the Russians. The Russians need to do the same thing as the Ukrainians did in the counter-offensive operation near Kharkiv area. They need to attack, they need to penetrate the Ukrainian defense line, they need to establish control over big territory of Ukraine, and then they need to prepare the defense line. And the only area where the Russians are able to do this is Chernigov and Sumy region, because if talking about Kharkiv, it's highly unlikely. The Russians made a few attempts in the past and they were completely defeated near Kharkiv. It's a very big town, very easy to protect. But if we're talking about Sumy and Chernigov area, this is the best solution for the Russians if they want to take control over this territory. If we take a look at the map, energy map, in this case, if the Russians cross the border near Chernigov and Sumy, first they will be able to penetrate, they will be able to repeat their success on February, the Ukrainian success in Kharkiv district, and they will be able to shut down and cut the west of Ukraine with the east of Ukraine lines that moves through Kiev. So that's why this solution with north of Ukraine is the best. If we're talking about strategic perspective, these regions are not very useful. There are nothing there, small towns, it's just villages, there is no ports, no sea, just population and media victory, I believe. And of course, as we discussed yesterday, in this case, the Russians will be able to get as close as possible to Kiev and start shilling the Kiev, trying to force Zelensky to start negotiation process. So, and that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.